Don't you feel the bullshit?
Get matched with a sex stylist for free.
From the chemistry, shall prosper. It won't work. No weapon on against me shall prosper. It won't work. I know God will do what He said He will do. If you stand by your word, He will come through. Yeah. When she walked out that stove, she felt the presence. You understand me? The presence of the Lord is here. The presence of the Lord is here. Hey, I can feel it in the atmosphere. The presence of the Lord. Bitch, quit looking at me while I'm singing my church song.
Well, you get your bitch ass.
He's here.
Bitch ass is dope.
He is holy. Oh, so holy. Oh, I told you. He is holy. Oh, so holy. Oh, yeah. What a privilege and honor to worship at your throne, to be called into His presence after all. Oh, He is faithful. Oh, so faithful. Yeah. He is faithful. Oh, so faithful. Yeah, that's what I told her. She gonna read your niggas round the world. You gotta feel me like, for real. Never thought that I would go to the pen. Politics that I would do it again. I'm a statistic and smash down. They kill a nigga, then we black out. You kill a nigga, we get maxed out. Damn, the government put us in poverty. We commit robbery. Some selling dope on the road. There's a girl who made A's in biology. She sell her body just to put food on the stove. Know what you call it? White people say they all that, but they ain't never slept on the floor for the rent sale. Dope went cold, had to sleep in the trenches. Probably wouldn't need to if I wasn't a victim. My nigga people, but look how they did them. Mama couldn't sleep if her kids wasn't with them. My daddy did things in the streets, now I'm in them. Stay ahead of the game and move cautious. Never knew what it meant, I'm not a scholar. Killers by the color of skin, we got a problem. Cemetery go to the pen, that's not an option. I go hard, but fucking up being honest. Nigga kill a nigga, that's solitary confinement. We did ever murder, they treat him like he a lion. Like I'm in a cage and take him out of his environment. Set it up, yeah, nigga, we slime. They blind to the fact of the truth. They put us in project and kill all the roofs, and a man in the house gonna be forced to get loose. Jail said, yeah, nigga, they my lawyer got out on a 100K bond. Did him. Thinking about the victim. Apology to my killer, I gotta get him for the killer. Prosecuting up with us, they want to drip it to the liver. Looking out for the nigga, never with a couple killers who with it, ready to go with some gorilla. Gun in my face, told the law I surrender. Top flow with my condo, won't jump out no wonder. Life that I live, told how I protect me. This lethal weapon, how I remember. Dope in that stolo, I drove like a rental. Bitch, you got real and he Louis V slippers. Haters, they wishing, they catch me lacking and slipping. Convict me, I won't let them do it. No weapon against me shall prosper, I promise. You want this chain, you gon' have to shoot it. Hit on that Uzi. Can't let go up on that Ruger, no up in it, unless I use it. I was just broken the bitch eating noodles. Now I'm with Junior when I'm out of use. Yeah. I be with Junior when I'm out of use. Bitch on a rag eating dick, then I lose her. I'm the best nigga, don't get look. They don't understand it, hate that I made. Why? I come from nothing, my stomach was aching. Bitches wouldn't fuck me, they say I was basic. And they wouldn't give me nothing, not even no conversation. Baby mama got a phone call.
Natalie, do you know if your kids are home from school yet? Like, are your kids home safe? Did something happen to them?
With advanced AI object detection and up to 4K resolution, you can protect your everything with Arlo.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to Bumble Presents Love to See It, hosted by yours truly, Tiana Taylor. Yeah, that's me. We're going to unpack all of the shades of Black love and get into the perspectives of Black Bumble daters by exploring the good, the bad, the beautiful through topics like red and green flags, polyamory, sex and intimacy, and so.
Hello? Another bitch playing about where I be and where I fell asleep, you know. Shit that they been saying. Meanwhile, I'm on the other line with my dog, and something ain't right. They shot up his mama house, hit up his brother, he died in the hospital. Now we on strike. I feel his pain, know that he ain't crazy. Who got him? His partner was hate. Died up in this butter black of cocaine. This bitch got him up, but I won't say her name. Now I'm talking to the Lord, and I'm asking God, keep me safe, but I'm worried. But now I'm talking to the devil, now he telling me that we should go and kill him first. Ready to get him? Won't see the hers. The gift that I got is so good that it's hers. Want you to make it? Just not farther than them. The realest shit I ever heard. For the dollar, I get it. Me a top shot, just don't get hurt. Under my sweater, it's the weather, it's whatever that's on my word. You know what I had to do to get home. Don't need all these niggas, so I'd rather be home. One day these niggas gon' try and take 3 out his home. I be damned if I let them, cause I gotta make it back home. While they get the holiday, make they mind them not to ride with a mouth. I'm sick and tired, I had to swallow my pride. The Heavenly Father, know they watching, but I gotta provide. Got a mama, hope you keep her alive. Not a partner that I lost to the coppers. Get a little bitch on the boss of this roster. They ready to ride. I know they gon' kill them, I gotta get them out the hood before they die. I know they itching when I look in their eyes. Bringing them back with extendo, let down the window, rearrange the whole scene up. Blouse come wig like we ain't seen nothing. Get it and go, make sure you change your demeanor. Pockets sitting thicker than the legs from Dave Beamer. Fuck the white girl, she take dick a real screamer. Salute her, she ain't sneezing the day that I seen her. Interrogation room, the lounge looking for the heater. Talking about the 3, she started speaking amnesia. Remember when I stole her was a photo green beamer? They ain't let me drive because I probably would have wrecked it. Don't believe the lies, bitch, I'm highly respected. A man never test me, he'll die by this weapon. Learn how to shoot, took time to perfect it. All hell is the king, bitch, I'm a guy in my section. I ain't gotta improvise, fuck the side that I'm repping. They don't recognize that I strive for this blessing. Yeah, look, champion, I'm a champion, I win. Ooh, I'm pulling up his homicide, I'm shutting it down, and I know they gon' hate on 3, 4, whatever. Look, they think they be playing crazy, but fuck that little 80 if it ain't in my jeans. Look, when I unload, shoot this bitch and aim it, yelling fuck who he came with, hope they balance on me. Look. And bitches homicide when I get live. Just don't testify. Nigga plot on me, get shot in his sleep, solo mission, I'm gone. Give a fuck who rock with 3, all I got is me, I did this shit on my own. They say he wrong, that nigga did it. Niggas ain't getting it like they say they living. Sound like a bitch in some missing whole business. Won't catch me round with a missing whole with me. This a condition, look my religion. Elijah Muhammad to Allah, I'm with it. Due to the fake creeping, do nobody know. Feel like somebody watching, so I got it on me. And I gotta be super low-key. Gotta know my struggle get deep, cause I'm in these streets. Gotta come along to apologize. I might be gone if they come get me for this homicide. My bitch complaining, I know what she need. Give her that dick when I be stroking, going deep. They selling drugs. I've been on the grind, I ain't lied so long. Niggas pull up, choppers on up. Tell them where I come from, it ain't no love. We selling drugs. Niggas want the pain, but really want the fame. I never change, I remain the same. Stay ahead of the game, I'm strapped with that thing. It's 7 o'clock on the dot. I'm in my drop top, cruising the streets. I got a real pretty little thing that's waiting for 3. I put love, anticipating good love. Don't you worry. I got plans to put my hand in places I've never seen. You know what I mean? Let me tell you to play nice and quiet. There ain't no one that turn around. I ain't gotta run. I just wanna take it nice and slow. Dun, dun, dun. And I've been waiting on it so long. Making love till the sun comes up. Baby, I just wanna take it nice and slow. Now here we are, driving around town, contemplating where I'm gonna lay you down. Girl, you got me saying my mind. Wish that I pull up and get this thing started right now. I wanna do something, bring it to you, girl. I don't think they hurt me. I wanna do something, freaky to you, girl. Now call out my name. They call me MOTHREEBADAZZ. Oh no, man, let me fuck up my song, man. Hold on, man, hold on. I can lay you down, take your panties out, kiss you softly. Girl, all me. Satisfying, I can get you satisfied. I can get you, girl. Girl, you know all the places to kiss and turn around. Like a screaming moan. I do what you want. And I float on inside the ocean. Where the ocean, yeah. Girl, stop calling on my phone. Yes, I got you paid. I just jumped in my ride. I'm on the way. I know you know I wouldn't play. I wanna see Victoria's Secret with your head there, die. All you gotta say yes, say yes, say yes, girl. Now we're running along as he wants some more. I'm now gonna take it back on our sneaking hoes in the crew. Boom, 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 boom. We can do it all night, girl. We can do it all night, yeah. We can do it all night, girl. We can do it all night, baby, all night, yeah. All night, we do it. All night, give it to you. All night, alright. Don't you be on that bullshit, yeah, yeah. You be on that bullshit, yeah, yeah. You be on that bullshit, yeah, yeah. One or two things that can happen at this time of the hour. Maybe I can be me at the shower. Forward to the bed, turn off all the lights and light some candles instead. Whoa, yeah. I can anybody call it, baby. Whoa, yeah. We gon' get freaky, you know. Darling, she know what time it is. Get it in, how we do it all. We ain't gon' stop till 9 a.m. If you ain't taking my face, baby, everyone knows that it already gone. Won't look at you when we do it all night. We do it all night. We do it all night, so night. Don't you be all that bullshit, yeah, yeah. Be all that bullshit, yeah, yeah. Be all that bullshit, yeah, yeah. Your girlfriend wants to be 3 girlfriend. She be calling me, telling me about you. How you ain't hitting me the light supposed to get it. You slip in, I think it's time I slipped in now. Your girlfriend wants to be 3 girlfriend. She be calling me, telling me about you. How you ain't hit it, how you supposed to hit it. You slip in, I think it's time I slipped in. Oh. Now lately, your baby's been 3 babies, sorta. I've been on her, she been on me too. And it's all because of you. You ain't hitting like you supposed to, treat her like you supposed to. Every day I'm getting closer, closer. Your girlfriend wants to be mine. She calls me all the time and lets me know I'm on her mind. And I don't know what to say, but hey, I'm sorry that it turned out this way. You deserve better, better. I think it's time to let them know that you need to let them go. Let them go. You deserve better, better. Baby, we don't need no strip for this. I'ma throw a couple dollars, here you go. Baby, pull out a camera, let's make a movie, yeah. Starring you and me, yeah. Baby, we don't need no just see, and we gon' hang up. Now, fuck, I'll switch it up. Gangsta shit. I'm gon' get them clips for him. I'ma throw a couple hollows, they gon' rip through him. I'ma pull out that timer, I'm talking 2 leaves, yeah. Smoke 'em like a doobie, yeah. And I'm gon' grab that Mac 10, guaranteed a couple hollers will push his back. And I'ma pull out them hammers, I'm talking 2 leaves, yeah. Smoke 'em like a doobie, yeah. Oh, yeah, we turned up. Every day a message on counting. Right there, that's what shit. Bitch, you know that I'm a hustler. You know that's every day I'm had to try to count. Every day I'm trying to count. Bitch, you know that I'm a hustler. Stack it up. Bitch, I'm racked up. Got off the phone with my mind. Got off the phone. See me when it done. Oh, we ain't laughing no boot boy. You found me, yeah. Hey, don't say, yeah. I be at you on my grind like that. Oh, you know, in the time like that. Oh, no, easy going down. Oh, easy going down. Oh, easy going down. Yeah. Oh, now you going down. Yeah. Oh, easy on. Yeah. Oh, easy on. She got out the phone with my mama. 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 She got out the phone. She got out the phone with my mama. Mama, I cried, I tried. Told her I wanna go home, look, I promise. Mama, no lie, I tried. Ain't no turning down. Hey, on the way home. Girl, I ain't like you. Try to fuck the game. Oh, she got out the phone with my mama. That bad. I'm in Facebook jail, can't get that. But now I wanna better. I got what niggas. This girl and that's my mama tell me. Yeah. They gon' say the son of hustler. Every day I'm out to trying to count it. Bitch, you know that I'm a hustler. Stack it up. Bitch, I'm wrecked up. My persona says a hustler. You can go and ask the preacher about me. Go and ask the preacher about me. He gon' say that boy a hustler. Yeah. Hustler. Yeah. Hustler. I'm at the doctor. I'm trying to find me. I don't really want to be wrong. Find me. And I don't really want to go find me. You feeling up in your own. Cause they said I was in, was getting cold. Niggas killing for pennies, they ain't got no hope. Niggas who doing 50 a life with no parole. Southside the really said they living out of control. Hey, yo, B, this my business, bitch, it be tricking that for sure. When it come to that dollar, I gotta get it, I want more. This for my niggas who gon' get it all out for home. And that for sure. Word around town, body got slumped over in the car, stretched out on the round down with a honey. We gon' gut you down, and that water you will see. Play, go and kill us out the way, get a nigga slay, get a nigga K. Like a nigga out the way, get him out the way, hit him in the face. I'm a play, better try to win. Oh, my mama. I cried. I wanna go home to the mama. I tried. Ain't no turning now. It's on the way home. Cool. I take the dream away from you. Bitch, I'm a dog. Woo. Hop in the ball. Woo. Hop in the ball. Woo. After that, when they run the beat, I hit when the you know. I'm singing the bitch. I'm singing the hoe. Yeah. Singing the hoe. You can go and ask my mama about me. But she gon' say the son's a hustler. Every day I'm out to try to count shit. Bitch, you know that I'm a hustler. Stack it up. Bitch, I'm wrecked up. Nothing sign says a hustler. You can go and ask my mouth, baby. Bitch, you know that I'm a hustler. Oh, na 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 na, yeah. Na na na, yeah. So did myself, sign on. All my life I want to fall and make it. This a letter to my dog, we gon' make it. Nigga playing, I'm going a while before he take me. Gonna have to take me. I'm taking down by the river with that new bro. Gonna be the black I turn on when I get now one right verse and try to put on my. Heard these niggas running around and they talking foul. Pop up with them choppers out, what they talking about? We chop up they pot in the house, we gon' talk it out. I'm excited, it's been a crime scene, they gon' choke them out. Block a cloud, hello me Jamaica now, we won't make a sound. Block a cloud, chase them down. Run, body up under my ankles now. Ooh. They got me heated. Run up on this and your life, I'ma keep it. Die for no reason. Jumping that water like I'm a Marine. I'm Scuba Steve. Nigga don't play, got that rule on me. I'm finna get even. My guy got hit. I know you. Brother. I know you heard how to rock the go back and kill him. Bitch, that little nigga like bitch, it's a party. You know what I want to go drop in the bitch. Yeah. I gotta redo that bit. Nah, cause I gotta say some more feeling. I was freestyling and now I know the whole words. That's very good. No, I'm sorry, you gotta. I gotta say that little part. This little one spot where jumping in water like I'm a Marine. I'm Scuba Steve. They got that Rugal on me. I'm finna get even. My guy got hit now. I gotta slide through this. Really, robbing me. I know you heard we hit him to go back and kill all the opposite. Put that little nigga like bitches bills. You know what? I hope you go drop in the beat. Yeah. That somebody got found, so I'm over in the car, body stretched out on the ground, run them down with 100, we gon' gun you down, in the water, you gon' swim or drown, or you gon' make it out, they better run, somebody get slow, better run, you in trouble now. Up in town. Hit that car up. Watch it. Hope he got a life jacket. He gonna swim it dry. The Chris Brown. We gonna take him down. Tell my hitters keep it quiet. Shh. They will not talk to nobody. No, I'm not paying nobody. I'ma do something about it. Spin around, turn on, they block with the chop, throw away. We take the place off my phone, pull up, and we let the blame out the job, but we take them on, they going on. Gang. Pull up, and we let the blame out the job. I'm a mama. Won't see my boss, I'm a summer. Won't see my neighbor, they kiss me about it. He's a gunner. Why would I go get the trash on that bitch? Why I go get the trash on that bitch? Jump in that water like I'm a Marine. Steve, is that my favorite part? You can read in the water. I said, what about it? Jump in that water like I'm a Marine. It's cool, Steve. Nigga don't play got that root on me. My guy got hit now. I just She told me you could have went live on my page. I know you heard that. Popeye and this bitch, man. Wrong town. Slumped over in the car. Run him down with 100 rounds. In that water, you gon' swim or drown. Oh, 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 you better run. Oh, oh, somebody get some. Oh, oh. Rasta boy. Some shots out in the streets. What's up, guys? They call it murder. Welcome to Jabra. I don't know one of the other motherfuckers. We shoot like Oakland. Chopper we stick song. Know how we coming. Poking up the rum the dumb, they shoot up his stomach. Put a hole in his back, boy. What will his hand be? Burn like a motherfucking red red bomb. You dead dumb. Pop up with me sticks like young. Yeah, young. Oh, oh, better run. Oh, oh, oh. They just got the word. The towel. Find out where he came from. And they built it in the night. Did you ready to the drops? Yeah. Roll down the window of him. Roll it on both corners. I'm about to shoot out of it. He might down. By the time I'm reaching down to my bitches, no money just to get back out of it. Oh, God, I ain't lying up to text. Levine probably wouldn't got there through that. I call up gut on my cousin like, listen, bitch, I need this strips like bitches, come get it. Went to the summer here by the business. 38 slugs, no tucked in my dinkies. Every outside by the I'm saying, when we pulling up on the side of the building, we walk on Thursday, he passed me the thing like blood, we say, he tripping, he feels it. Phone song ringing, it's my mama, I did it. After this phone till I finish this mission. Ain't the song, but I answer my did it. Landed in bricks, surrounded by fish. We clap out the Lord. Praise the Lord. Yeah. The other one I lack. Yeah. You just need that.
Is that John?
That's John. It's me.
Just making sure you're you. Two-step verification style. Two-step verification adds an extra step when you sign in to make sure you're you. So even if a hacker steals your password, they still can't get into your Google account.
Yeah. Everything I spit real life is real facts on my mama that got out the mud. They how you feel like that? Why they won't throw dirt on my name? Yeah. Look down. Why it always hurt them every time that I say, yeah. Should kind of say on the truth. Look. Fuck what they saying, I'ma go get it. I slept on the floor in them trenches. I was so broke I couldn't fix it. Lost all I had and I'm missing. Ramen noodles by Hino wings. That shit made me a victim. Do you get it? Do you know what I had to do? I had to ride to go get the cream. You do not know what they struggle mean. Do you know what I had to do? Jump in that water, no submarine. Go get the dough, what the fuck you mean? Free about that action, don't come for me. Won't get me lacking that gun on me. Put that on my son, won't take nothing for 3. With every breath in my lungs, I'ma run the street. Granny told me what she heard through the grapevine. Niggas holler I ain't better, but they stay lying. Young nigga, I was broke, same clothes for a week, but they still fuck a beach at the same time. Ready to get in my head a vision when I walk through the mouth and buy nothing but the knockout version. How they were laughing, my shoes, they were dirty. Ashamed of my feet, used to leave school early. That's the same hoe I used to fuck in the style. She discharged and I was young, wasn't looking at a drought. Held my dick to the side when I pissed, cause it hurt, so I learned. Never fuck another bitch wrong. Don't let them lie to you. We did not have shit. Could call on mama, won't talk to my daddy. Hoes in my school used to talk about me badly. Dirty ass dicky pants made me hate fashion. Nothing ass hoes like, look, girly ratchet. Tired of this shit, start jacking. I'm a savage. Locked down in the cell on the set, I was crashing. Ask them in jail, boy, I gave them boys action. So I thought they turning up, then they thought they camping. Hoes thought they running up, I guess I'm attractive. to see me. Only phone, the radio, or the TV screen. When you leave, you alone. Ooh, it's hard to be real with them, knowing they don't want to see you eat. I come from the ghetto like my father's needle. Had to get it out the mud to feed my mama meal. Ooh, I'm on their ass, cause they put me last. I'm finna come first, finna hit them where it hurt. I just want, ooh, I want my bag, my bag. I just want my bag. I'm just trying to get in my bag. Mm-mm. Hey, you gotta feel me when I tell you my side. You gotta feel me when I say they go right. Hey, 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 ooh. Look. If you ain't ever had to struggle like these, you wouldn't understand the way I feed my family. I come from nothing and it hurt from being real. I'm tired of seeing my mama shed a tear. All my life was in the field. That money, that moolah made me go crazy. Go and get it, my mother, that's on the daily. My baby needs some Pampers, P.O. on my ass. So, bitch, I gotta scratch on the block from 9 to 5. I'm getting it till the loudest come. Hoping that I make it to my daughter and my son. You gotta relate and feel my energy. Keep that 30 on my waist, is from my enemies. Feel like my life is like a movie scene. Baby, that's a ghetto dream. Ghetto dream. This for them kids who ain't got nothing else to eat. Baby, it's a ghetto dream. I got a ghetto dream. And when you look me in my eye, how you doing, Miss Lady? Look, I've been thinking. What you smoking, what you drinking? I can get you anything. You gotta let me. Yeah, look. And I ain't gotta say a damn thing. But girl, I'm trying to get you. Cause someone who knows how to ride can take different positions. Now you screaming up and down we go. That's why I never met the type of girl that's quite like you. Keep it on the low. And I could give more than the girl, it's true. But I only did it one time. Yeah. One time. But I need it one time. One time. Like I'm hurting, but I'm hurting. I ain't perfect, but I pray that I see better days. Yeah, look. And if you love me, why you let me niggas hate on me this way? I need a break, yeah. He told me I gave you a gift, and with that gift, I hope you take the word and elevate, yeah. So folk will never stay and separate. Sometimes I gotta keep it real and tell them how I feel, yeah. But they don't seem to understand. Yeah, God gave me a second chance, yeah. Second chance. And I don't need nobody, just gon' get my money. Look, down on my knees, I got a blessing come me. Cause he gave me a second chance, yeah. Second chance. No way, brother, yeah. For nothing to me. Share prosperity. We won't. So much pain. They gon' feel my sin.
This is
STD on the way. Yeah.
Game Boy.
And I really like yeah. Been through the worst and through the storm you won't believe. They turned on me. Shit made me evil. You ain't gon' ride, you ain't my slime, you ain't my equal. Thought you were live, you killed the vibe, thought we were people. But I really wish I knew. Got out of jail, giving them hell, put the brick on the scale. Was locked in the cell, trying to prevail. Now I'm rocking Chanel. I never told, I would never tell. They gon' give me the chair. Slicking with the gun, my fist ain't no run. Got the gun with my clown, I really wish it. Ooh, I really trusted you. Ooh, I made love to you. Ooh, my little Rudy. Hot the boo. Deep out of my slide through. Drive out with the 4-5 on the roof. So when I do back, I'm asking me what's going on. Said you gotta hold on. People ask me, yeah, what's going on? Said you gotta stay strong. I'm sick and tired of having thoughts. And niggas talking like they blind. Baby, I say fuck this shit cause I got other problems. I'm just trying to be the boss. I'm just being honest. Take care of my family cause we came from the bottom. Something gotta give. I've been in the field. I won't get the time I spend locked away for real. Bitches, they keep switching up our relationships. Partners turning enemies, the fame to call my friends. We gotta on. It ain't no love. Tell me why they did me wrong, I'm hated by the ones I trust. Hey, okay. We know. Ooh, please don't. Don't ever let me let my guard down. Yeah. I just wanna tell my time. I just wanna tell my side. Yeah, look. I wish I had 100 grand. Yeah. I used to say that till I made 100 bands. Assistance from the government. See, bitch, I took that in Iran. Food stamps, they kept me fed, you don't understand. I'm praying for a second chance. See, I was in the selling dope and shooting guns. You fucking hoes and poppers, and we not the same, boy, I'm just saying. Hey, comes around my wrist. Dirty money in my hands, no, I ain't playing. I can't lie, hurt my feelings, not knowing what I'm gonna eat today. Last $50, not knowing what I'm gonna sleep today. Hurt my feelings when they said I was broke. Can't care what people think. Gotta learn, you got to struggle sometimes. So shit, it be this way. Granny probably looking down on me now. Like, what would Jesus think? Sorry, Granny, I can't talk to him now. But happy Easter day. Fuck 12 and them alphabet boys. But bitch, I keep a K. INGOF for the streets. Make sure my people straight. Hey, come on, music up. Back to back lamb trucks on them, bitch, how I'm pulling up. Love my dog the devil right now. I don't know who to trust. And sorry to that bitch, I did wrong. I kept on using her. This shit so beautiful. Run down on your game for this child, please see the you and us. Yeah. Ooh, we know. Ooh, please, yeah. And I'm saying, yeah. Ooh, we know. Don't ever let me let my guard down. Ooh, please, no. Ooh, we know. Too many people rip my heart out. Hey, I'm just trying to do what I can, hoping they understand. Ooh, we know. Ooh, please don't. Don't ever let me let my guard down. Come be my quarantine free, yeah. Let's do some quarantine.
Our priority is always great customer service.
Hey guys, still doing the whole no mascot thing? Because if you are interested, I got a few gigs in the works, so I might not be available.
Some insurance companies are known for their mascots. NJM is known for outstanding service you can count on.
Hey, how you doing, Miss Lady? I'm trying to flex. She DM back, I put the play full of fake. Yeah. She sent the pics to me, she think I'm on her name. Got a GPS and she's so wet and I'm like, hey. Look, I'm on the way now. Ain't no need for you to speak, you know it's something you see me. Look, and now I'm playing around. Never everybody gotta do the things you do to me. You say that you like this. You want me to stroking go deeper when I be riding. You want my turn to go la. Love you one time for me and keep riding. Feel your spine, I'm going up and down. Look, baby, I'm a quarantine fiend. Let's do some quarantine things. Keep going round and round. Baby, I'm a quarantine fiend. Come be my quarantine free. Keep on pushing, yeah. Keep on pushing up. And now you looking, yeah. You want time for me. Need a movement. Wanna keep that cookie now. This sticky icky, yeah. It's that cushion. Up and down, round and round. I'ma go slow. Round for pound, we on the ground, fucking on the floor. The neighbors said they heard the sound, cut off the radio. She say free whatever, just turn on my favorite song. Look, I gave my heart to a bitch, and what she do, she crushed it. Gave my heart to a nigga, and what he do, say fuck me. Now I'm riding by myself, lonely, I'm getting money. And look, I'm shining, but I won't let them take nothing from me. All my life they talk about me, they may need to blame. But if you struggle like I struggle, you would've did the same. I got family to feed, I pray for better days. And I won't let them see me weak, they gotta feel my pain. Try to throw dirt on my name, but I won't let them. Tried to convict me for that case, but I wouldn't let them. Pastor got jealous from my place, but I won't let them. Look, they tried their hardest to break me, but I wouldn't let them. They tried their hardest to break me, but I wouldn't let them. That bitch, I'm fucking her home. They tried to tell me, look, I really liked her a lot. Thought she was special, but she was fucking a nigga she thought looked better. But I ain't thinking about no looks, I'm thinking about some cheddar. Can't judge a cover by the book, the fakest be the realest. The streets done did me dirty, it's so cold, I need a sweater. Mama always say she told her I don't need no lecture. I ain't switch, I just went forward. Bitch, I'm Ali in my bubble. Got them racks and cop the Ford. Man, that boy applying pressure. I spent 30 on this watch. I'm on that neck and I won't let them. And I got 30 in this Glock. Don't make me put them on the stretcher. My shoulder you can lean on. I'ma keep it G. Told my brother we own it. He thought I was tweaking. Till I showed him my condo and 50 days in my jeans. If all them hoes I used to want, I don't give a damn if they speak. Look, all my life they talked about me, they made me to blame. But if you struggle like I struggle, you would have did the same thing, yeah. I got family to feed, I pray for better days. And I won't let them see me weak, they gotta feel my pain. Tried to throw dirt on my name, but I wouldn't let them. Look, tried to convict me for that case, but I wouldn't let them. Partner got jealous from my place, but I won't let them. Look, they tried their hardest to bring me, but I wouldn't let them. Yeah. That's why I love with you. She said she wait. She tryna lay down. I told her, babe. She say don't play around. She need my sex. She tired of waiting around. I'm on it. I'm feeling taken down. That's why I fuck with you. I gotta keep it tight. 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 Ooh, I gotta leave you. I'm feeling it. Hands all in my ethicals. Jack his dick out, eat this dick before I beat your back in. Took off her lip gloss, put my balls on her jaws, I bust and push the bitch off. Then tell her get back on, left her broad black thong. Clutching like I iron, I blow that bitch just like a saxophone. Superhead, the brain that she be giving, got me acting slow. Gangster when I'm in it, this so pretty, but she ratchet though. Her friend be like, you fucking Mo3, damn ho, what you asking for? No, I keep that dirty, won't catch me lacking in your daddy know. And plastic for that action, if we fuck, don't do no bragging ho. Your friend trying to get hit, must be my beat, what you was bragging for. But she was just a little tacky hoe. Ain't dick like laughing tapping though. Dick a nigga bitch down. Her baby daddy, man, for sure won't static. But I stretch him like the hero from Fantastic Four. You gon' suck it sideways. I got my eyes closed, bend that ass sideways. Then bring it back some more and praise it, praise it, praise it, praise it, praise it. If it's clean, I might go on to let me taste it, taste it, taste it, taste it, taste it. And now I'm saying thing, you can't take it, take it, take it, take it, take it. And I'ma leave it in and make a baby, 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 baby. Yeah. Well, yeah. Look, how you gonna be real with somebody you can't be real with yourself? Stay lying to yourself, tell yourself the truth. Yeah. Ooh, lately I've been in my feelings. I pray to God he take this pain away. They be asking how I'm feeling. But I just tell them that I'm trying to maintain. Struggle in apartment buildings. But I'ma put my kids in a better place. Sometimes I feel like God don't listen to me. But I'ma keep on praying till I see better days. Baby, I just need some love and affection. Yeah. Baby girl, I'm just a thug with some built up aggression, built up aggression. You the angel on my shoulder when I'm stressing. The devil on my back trying to send me in the wrong direction. Got murder on my mind, you don't got time and know I'm reckless. Don't wanna be a victim to the gun, so I be stepping. Hoping into heaven for a thug. I feel like I'm running out of love. Baby girl, I'm running out of trust. I don't know who to talk to. Nigga try to snake me, I'm so done. When the laws come, you know I'm on the run. Well, I'm wondering if it's worth it. I know I ain't perfect. Yeah, look. And girl, I know you've been working, but baby, I'm hurting. Yeah, yeah. Now can you hear my soul cry? Hear my soul cry. Baby girl, I know you so tired, but we got so time. Do you got time for me, yeah? Do you got love for me, yeah? Like I love you. You ain't got time to speak, yeah. You say I'm a dog, it's true, but I want you. I can feel it raining down here. Baby, let me ease your pain. I want you to love me like my mama loved me. I want loyalty, no mama, I won't need a thing. Ooh, yes, she did. Fuck being faithful, these effects. And nowadays they texting 2 or 3 niggas that's dead on that. I thought I knew who you was. Thought I knew I love. Found out that shit wasn't real. I must be dumb as they come. Protect your name, but all I have is you took mine through the mud. We got this shit out the mud. I guess it was what he was. I thought I knew who you was. Thought I knew I love. Found out that she wasn't real. I must be dumb as they come. Protect your name, but all I have is you took mine through the mud. We got this shit out the mud. I guess it was what ooh, we know. Ooh, yeah. I've been looking for a lick, my pocket's empty. Damn, I must be dreaming. Cause the partners that I love say they gon' kill me. And that just may be the reason. I'm so numb to the pain. I go dumb in the brain. My partner gotta be silent like the blood in my vein. I'm so tired of broken love and tired of hoes running game. Baby, what's the motto? I gotta stay focused. The love I got for you is not the same. You gotta show me. We selling dope out in the rain. Got tired of them eviction notices. When I ain't ever thank you, baby girl, she barely noticed me. I won't tell her so. When it get real, oh, I'm a shark. Hope the light don't ever shine on the shit that I did in the dark. Like the time we slid and hit on board and put the car in park. But that's enough about that part. I'm still working on my heart. You see my picture like it's art. Painting like Picasso, pull up semi-auto. You get wet tomorrow. This ain't Grand Theft Auto. Nigga, this is real life, and I feel like we get real. I earn my real stripes. Can you put your arms around me, girl, and fuck me like the last time? And I don't mean to be a problem, but it hurt me, yeah. When I think about the bad times, I put my stick down, they gon' make me get down. So bitches on me, they gon' make a nigga flash out. So can you put your arms around me, girl, and fuck me like the...
This is Red Bull 3X. Ready to run it back? Learn more at redbull.com/3X.
Last time, why they scared to come outside. Tell the boys they better pray. Tell the boys stay out the way. Tell them ain't nobody safe from my mama on my gang. We gon' put it in their face. Yeah. They scared to come outside. Niggas always stabbing night and day. God knows stepping down with life. Until it hurts, it ain't no mercy, that's just how we made. You heard that church up in my verses, cause that's how I raised. I told God he gotta forgive me, I'm insane, no. Get down on my knees when I'm in pain, no. Tired of the rain on my name. Oh, Jesus, please. Can you feel my needs, yeah? Tired of fucking up, I'm in the streets, yeah. Tryna take away this hurt inside of me. God, I need a second chance. Knowing that I love you, but sometimes I do the devil dance. Lost a couple of my partners, so I'm sliding out of whoever in. Drop one of them niggas when I kill them. Call the reverend. Cause no weapon formed against me shall prosper, yeah. God know I'm clutching on this chopper, yeah. Waiting on the boys outside. You know, no never on the game. We gon' put it in their face. That's just how we pray. You're in that church up in my birth, and that's just how we pray. Ooh, yeah. They know I'm 798. Yeah. Please tell me God is there in heaven for a real one. I had to smoke with me the most. Lately I've been grinding on a mission when I be out. I don't got people that I rely on. And girl, I know this shit's not crazy, but fuck these bitches you like how. Because them hoes that play on my phone. Look in your eyes and told 1,000 lies before. But the love I got for you, I never lied on. I needed you to lean on. My dog just did me wrong, the same nigga I would've died for. Yeah. My nonchalant feelings be so stupid, and I'm sorry I be acting like I don't care. When it get bad, you sit at home, I go fuck out and steal my pussy, cause I know you ain't going nowhere. I know that's wrong, but pick up the phone, girl. Pick up the phone and let me know, yeah. I ain't insecure, I just been hurt a lot of times by a bitch I thought was for me, desire. I've been broken hearted, so I'm cautious with you. Feel like my soul departed, I'm so sorry, it's true. But I just want you. Lately I've been feeling like I'm about to lose. You got my head gone and I don't know what to do. And nigga, you dead wrong, you cross me, you fool. Yeah. My nigga, you dead wrong, you fool. Yeah. Down by the river, that river, that's where I threw that pole. Yeah, that's where I threw my pole. Down by the river, yeah, that's where I took his soul. Yeah, I took a nigga's soul. You gotta feel us, cause this is how we know. Yeah, this the life we chose. This for my nigga, my nigga, my nigga, who did not make it home. Yeah, look. Traumatized by the blood, I gotta think a lot. Thug stimulate your mind, I'm on some Vinci shit. Don't be begging for $1 from me, but all I got is 50 cents for a cigarette. Landlord of my apartment's knocking at the door. Got eviction, I'm like, fuck, I need to hear the leak. Catch a nigga leg and put a jacket on him. Stick the gun through the window just a little bit. Big bruise in my pocket, fuck the politics. I really got it out the mud or some different shit. They really felt what I was saying when I was talking to him. Without the radio, time made a difference. I rode the wave like Ryan on the rag of riches. Had to slave, no job, just a bag of grits. I'm a savage, I get active, I was bagging nipples. Toe tagging with the ratchet, I get active with it. They said rapper wasn't fun, I ain't letting up. I ain't had a money, she ain't let me fuck. Same bitch after my show, wanna take pictures with me. She want my number, so to put me through my manager. Run up on when I start, I'm not an amateur. Skied up, so I ain't worried about no camera. I treat the ops like dominoes at the table. When it's beef and it's up, I be slammed up. That's no pressure. And why wouldn't you turn this into a scripted show as well as like The Office or something? You got everything you need.
Funding for this program was provided by the UCLA Office of Instructional Development.
These are the individuals who've done the work that I'll present today. I have the privilege of working every day with these talented, dedicated, and wonderful individuals, many of whom are here today. Now, regarding the research environment at UCLA, let me illustrate it to you this way. I have only ever had one job. I came here as a postdoc. My mentors were Steve Martyr and Keith Nectarline, who are here today. I continue to work closely with them, and they have only ever had one job. The lab includes half a dozen junior faculty, 4 senior faculty, and all of them have only ever had one job. This configuration is so rare as to be virtually unheard of, but it happened here, it happened at UCLA. The rich scientific environment and collaborative culture here at UCLA means that people who are quite capable of going elsewhere want to stay and want to make their discoveries here. And this situation does not arise by accident. It happens because of people who have a vision of a superb research university. We have people here in this hall who are dedicated to establishing, maintaining, enhancing, and protecting the UCLA research environment. Please join me in thanking them. So let's get started. The talk will be divided into 2 parts, and the first part is the social brain, how it works and how it doesn't. So we'll talk about the kind of networks involved with social processing, how they fail in schizophrenia, and I'll make a distinction between ability versus motivation. That's the first part, and it's the part on which most of our research has been focused on the last few years. We have a lot of data in this first part. The second part's a new direction and consequently has much fewer data associated with it. It's how we extend this to the community, how we would recruit and assess disconnected individuals from the community, and how what we've learned in schizophrenia helps us to understand social disconnection. Although I am the 123rd recipient of this award and the 123rd person to give this presentation, I am the first to speak about mental illness. As such, the process might not be familiar. The process will be that we start with understanding normative processes, the normal brain in our case, and try to apply it to particular disease. The disease in our case is schizophrenia. And then in the second part, what we'll do is try to take what we learn, any insights from that process, and then apply it to the general population. First, a word about the methods I'll refer to. I'll be referring to 2 kind of brain-based methods. One is functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. I'll just refer to it as scanning. Many of you have already had MRIs. This is a particular one in which it detects minor changes in blood flow, and that way you can get a idea of which parts of the brain are active under which particular conditions. So this is a workhorse method for the social neuroscience that we'll be talking about. We also use EEG. So these are scalp recordings of electrical activity, and there's particular patterns that you can observe over particular regions, and consequently, if you average them, you can get particular waves. These would be waves that would be in response to some social stimuli or in particular social processing conditions. So I'll be in today's talk referring to EEG and referring to scanning, and these are the 2 methods we'll talk about. Because we start with the normal brain, I'm going to give you an example of the kind of neuroscience that can be used to study the normal brain. And in doing so, I'm going to highlight the work of one of our excellent collaborators, Naomi Eisenberger, who's right next door in the Department of Psychology in Franz Hall. So she and her colleagues have become interested in the regions for social pain or social rejection. And this is an interesting area in that it's a little counterintuitive. So, for example, you might think that there's got to be some region that focuses on the kind of pain you feel when you're rejected. But in fact, there's no special region for that. Instead, evolution was conservative. It said, if it spoke, was something like, I've got a perfectly good way to process pain, physical pain, I'll just use it for social pain. So the regions, and this is not something you can intuit, it's something you have to scan. The regions associated with physical pain are actually the same as with this kind of social pain or social rejection. And if that's so, then you should be able to manipulate them both, and you can. So for example, Tylenol can work on both physical pain and on social pain. So again, confirming that these are overlapping regions, that there's something conservative about this. Now, you're probably wondering how one studies social rejection in the scanner. It's not like you can have someone in the scanner and have their girlfriend break up with them. You have to sort of manipulate this a little bit. So this is done, Naomi and her colleagues do this with a game called Cyberball, in which there's a cover story. The cover story is that you're in the scanner, you're tossing a ball with two other individuals that are somewhere else on campus or somewhere else. They're able to decide where to throw the ball. You can decide then, when you get it, to pass it to this person or this person, so you have the little figures representing the other people you're playing with. And so this is going on for some period of time. And then all of a sudden, things change a little bit. What happens is that the two other people pass the ball back and forth to themselves, and you're excluded. Now, you might think, well, that's not much of a social exclusion because I don't even know these people, and these are just cartoons I'm looking at, and I'm in a scanner anyway, but it works. It works. In other words, you can get activation of the regions with this kind of manipulation. The regions involved with this, and let me pause here for just a minute and say that I know, since I've spoken enough, that about half of you really want to know where in the brain these events are occurring. And the other half of you really would like me to skip that part. So what I'll be doing is something in between, which is that I'll identify the regions. I won't dwell on them. I won't talk about the connections or the networks, so that they'll be identified, but we won't spend a lot of time. The regions that are associated with both social pain and physical pain is this dorsal part of the anterior cingulate cortex, as well as the anterior part of the insula. So those are these regions that serve this kind of dual purpose. So that's sort of an example of how we would benefit from the advances that our colleagues are doing with the normal brain. But we want to apply it to schizophrenia. So I'm going to intersperse from time to time quizzes into this talk. And you don't have to do anything, but you can guess if you want. So schizophrenia is a myth, a personal journey of discovery, a disease with clear diagnostic criteria, or a spectrum of features. It's been called all of these. It's not a myth. That was a older, somewhat irresponsible notion. It's certainly very real to those of us who study it and those of us who have it in family members. It's not a personal journey of discovery. That's an overly romanticized notion, but that notion does pop up from time to time. So neither first or second are correct. It's actually both 3 and 4. It's both the disease with diagnostic criteria and it's a spectrum. And you might say, well, it can't really be both of those. And sort of, kind of, yes, it is. The thing is that a diagnosis is always categorical. You either have it or you don't have the diagnosis. And so we'll be talking about the kind of criteria that are used to diagnose schizophrenia. But we know and have known for a long time that there's a spectrum of schizophrenia, meaning that you can have a tendency to it. You can have a little bit of it. You can have a watered down version of it. So even below that sort of severity threshold, you can have these kinds of tendencies. In the first part of the talk, I'll be focusing on diagnostic schizophrenia. On the second part of the talk, I'll be focusing more on this notion of a spectrum where you can have a little bit of it, but not meet the criteria. So the diagnosis of schizophrenia it's not one thing. You have to have a bunch of things. So I'll just spend a minute on this so that so that when we go forward, you know what I'm referring to. So you need at least 2 of these symptoms. Some of these should be familiar to you. So delusions would be false beliefs that the person holds on to. They could be suspiciousness that they think people are out to get them, or grandiose that they have unusual abilities, or it could be bizarre that aliens from another planet are affecting them. Hallucinations are hearing things that aren't there or seeing things that aren't there, no one else sees. And in schizophrenia, it's most commonly the hearing voices that we come. Disorganized speech is actually a breakdown in the form of speech. So it's not exactly what someone's saying, it's the structure of speech breaks down so that it's hard to actually understand how the language is structured. Disorganized behavior is anything that appears to be odd. So it's not just appears to be threatening or appears to be uncomfortable, it appears to be odd, and frankly, you don't have to go that far. You can observe it in Westwood Village. So these are the kinds of things that make you think someone's not entirely there. Negative symptoms are attracting a lot of interest from our group, have been for years. These are what you lose with the disease. In other words, it's the lack of something, the lack of expression, the lack of motivation. Anhedonia is the lack of wanting to do something, having that oomph to sort of go out and give something a try. So these are negative symptoms, and you don't need all of these, you just need two. You also need social work dysfunction, and there has to be a minimum duration. This is true for everyone with the diagnosis. There's a bunch of exclusions which aren't critical for this discussion. The first three symptoms here are, by definition, psychotic symptoms. So when people talk about a psychosis, psychotic symptoms, psychotic features, they're talking about these first three things here. And most people will say something like, yeah, but I know someone who has some of these features and they don't have schizophrenia. And the answer is, that's right. These are psychotic features that could appear in a range of psychiatric or neurological conditions. It's when you have the whole package that you have the diagnosis of schizophrenia. The work and social dysfunction is where we're going to be focused, because this is where we have our serious impairment in functioning. Schizophrenia is disabling. It's one of the most disabling disorders for men and women throughout the world. This social dysfunction is substantial. It's a big problem. And consequently, we want to understand what the brain basis is for this very large concern that our patients have terrific difficulty in integrating the community and maintaining these kinds of social functions. So we want to understand what the brain processes are that underlie these. Now, our lab has spent a fair amount of time identifying processes. These are essentially brain systems that are relevant for social functioning, that we can image or scan or EEG or whatever, that we can study them with brain-based methods. And these tend to have sub-processes. So at this point, I realized that this is too much. And you'd say, I don't want to hear about all this stuff. We study all of this stuff. Our lab has worked in all of those boxes, but it'd be tedious to go through them. So we'll go through an example of social cue perception, which is faces. We'll talk about experience sharing. We'll talk about mentalizing. We'll talk about emotion regulation, and then we'll move on from there. So let's talk about social cue perception. So that's the first process we'll talk about. We get cues from all kinds of things. We get cues from emotion in faces, intonation in voices, gait, gestures. We pick up cues. We do it fairly easily. And the people with schizophrenia who we work with don't do it as easily. They have trouble in picking up these cues. There's very large group differences between individuals with schizophrenia controls and how accurate they are in identifying, for example, the emotion in faces. So you use this ability and you don't think about it because it's too straightforward. But here's an example then that we can, let's consider Little Red Riding Hood. I mean, Little Red Riding Hood definitely looks fearful. You can tell that without much effort. She's not using, by the way, prototypic fear expressions, but she's using subtle versions of those fear expressions. When you came here to Schoenberg Hall, you walked in, you passed faces. You passed faces and you knew that you would come into this hall and find a place to sit. And you were going to find a place to sit by looking at faces. But when you got into the hall, you might realize that it's a little harder to identify individual faces from a distance. So you had to get closer. When you got closer, a couple things happened. One is you identified people you knew, or you identified faces that were welcoming. You did that, and I don't think any of you gave it any thought, but it's a big deal. It's a process that you've mastered, and it enables you to function well socially. The regions associated with this, particularly for face processing, are the fusiform gyrus here, the amygdala here. These regions are more associated with other types of cue perception, including this superior temporal sulcus. So those would be like identifying emotion in voices. But these are the two main regions, amygdala and fusiform, for identifying emotion in faces. So I've already pointed out that our patients aren't great at doing this. What does the scans tell us? These data, this isn't from our lab, although we've done work in this area. This is a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis where you put a bunch of studies together and see what the studies collectively are telling you. In this, we have group differences in which the individuals with schizophrenia do not activate when they're looking at emotional faces as much in the amygdala and the fusiform, the two regions that I just mentioned to you. So they're not doing this as much in the particular contrast. They're not sort of calling on these areas that are for face emotion processing. The blue regions actually are where they're doing more activity. It's kind of like they're activating more in regions that are not typically associated with face processing, and they're not activating enough in the regions that are associated with identifying emotion in faces. So we see now at a performance level and at a brain-based level that this is an area of which there's some difficulty in our patients. Here's another quiz for you. What does your brain say when you look at this photo? Let me think. If I had my arms in that position and was hunched over, I'd probably be feeling abdominal discomfort. That really hits me in the gut. Since that person is not me, I will actively try to not feel any pain. The answer is two. The answer is two. We do this reflexively. Now, you can certainly do one, and you can certainly do three, but that's not the first thing you're going to do. You actually have to try to do those. But the sort of gut connection that you get, that's fast, that's automatic, and that's part of experience sharing. So experience sharing is this amazing ability that we have, which is that when we observe others' behaviors, it leads us to experience neural activation as if we are doing those behaviors. This is one of the most remarkable things about our brains. I mean, our brains, when we observe someone moving or feeling something, we get activation as if we ourselves are experiencing or behaving that way. I mean, we all sit in different chairs, in different bodies, in different skins, and we feel very, very different. But this part of the brain reaches out and senses what's around it. And there's two flavors to experience sharing. It's important to keep them separate. One is motor resonance, which is this sharing that occurs when we see people move, when we see a movement, so a motor action. And affect sharing is what happens when we see someone experiencing an emotion, oftentimes a distressful emotion. So, for example, here are some examples of when we feel this kind of experience sharing. Here's another example of when we see someone in pain, we sense that, we get that automatic feeling. We feel the pain even if we inflicted the pain. So here's an example of a German POW being treated by an American medic. Those of us who are parents are really, really good at feeling kids' pain. We do this so automatically, it's so beyond our control that we feel our pets' pain. And the regions that do this include for the motor resonance, that movement part, the inferior parietal lobe and the premotor cortex, and those are the regions that are associated with the mirror neuron system. The regions associated with affect sharing, this kind of I feel your pain, those are different regions. So these are two different systems. But this is the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. So how do you study this? Because this is a bit difficult to study because you have to measure how someone is experiencing something. So we've used an approach with EEG. The study I'm presenting was Bill Horan's study from our lab. Mu is a frequency that you measure with EEG. It occurs in a certain range, certain electrodes. And it has this really amazing quality, which is that it sort of tracks with how social something is. So if you're observing things and there's a sort of, imagine a social ladder, that as you're observing stimuli and the stimuli become more and more social, you actually suppress mu more and more. So the more something becomes social, the less mu you have. So you can study this with EEG. So for example, you might show people bouncing balls, which is not social, and that's our control condition. Observe a moving hand, which isn't social, but it's kind of like that motor resonance thing I was talking about. How about moving your own hand? That, again, isn't terribly social. That's more like the kind of a motor resonance, but it at least involves another person, or in this case, you. But then you can show videos of people, watching people that are not interacting. So they're people, but it's not that social because they're not interacting. Or you can watch people as they're interacting, which is more social. Or then you can watch people as if they're throwing a ball to you. So as if they're including you in that. So you can think of that as a kind of social ladder or hierarchy in which the mu frequency should become more and more suppressed as we go up to these stimuli. And what we see in healthy controls is exactly that. We see this tendency to sort of show more and more suppression as the stimuli become more and more social. So the question is, what do our patients show? And the answer is almost the same thing. So this is an area in which when we have a system, we have a paradigm that works, the controls do exactly what we expect them to do, and our patients look like controls. And we see this now, not only in EEG, but also with fMRI. When we look at this experience sharing component, we don't find big differences between patients and controls. It's an area that's relatively intact. It might be that there's some subtle differences, entirely possible, but considering that it's so easy to find impairment in some areas, this is an area that's at least relatively intact. And that's important. It's important to identify areas of strengths in schizophrenia so that we know what to build on. So now that's experience sharing. The next topic will be mentalizing. Mentalizing goes by many names. It's also called theory of mind or mental state attribution. And it's the ability to infer the mental states of other people, including their intentions, their beliefs, their emotions. I mean, as we go through our social world, we need to take other people's viewpoints into account to make good guesses as to what's going on in their minds. And this is an ability that our patients have considerable difficulty with. So we have large differences between patients and controls. They have trouble with these kind of inferences, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, take someone else's perspective, make inferences about what someone else is thinking. This is actually an area in which our guys have some difficulty. So in terms of examples of mentalizing, because as I mentioned, when you just identify emotion and faces, normally that's pretty easy. But what if it's not? Like, for example, kids eating ice cream are always happy. So if the kid was smiling, I wouldn't be thinking about it, but the kid's not smiling. So it makes you wonder what's going on. So at that point, you have to move into something that requires a little bit of inference. Sometimes faces are intentionally ambiguous. Sometimes they're just utterly perplexing. Sometimes you need to do detective work to figure out what's going on. Sometimes you don't have enough information. And so you need to gather enough information to sort of understand what might be going on. And so this is this process of mentalizing, and it's this area in which we have performance problems. There is a very well identified mentalizing network, which includes the temporal parietal junction, the temporal pole, the precuneus here on the medial surface, and the medial prefrontal cortex, also on the medial. So the question becomes then, if we want to study this in the scanner, how do we do that? And so Jung-Hee Lee from our lab did an experiment in which we created a situation in which we presented individuals the situation in which there's a false belief. So I can just read this for you. John told Emily that he had a Porsche. Actually, his car is a Ford. Emily doesn't know anything about cars, though, so she believed John. When Emily sees John's car, she thinks it's A. And it's not a hard question to answer, but you need to suspend what you know to be true and take Emily's perspective. Contrast that with Amy made a painting of a treehouse 3 years ago when it was blue. That was before the storm. We built a new treehouse last summer, but we painted it red instead. The treehouse in the painting is, and again, you need to suspend what you know to be currently true to say what's true in the picture. The thing about these is that these are very similar in terms of cognitive processes, the first condition and the second condition, but they're not at all similar in terms of a social process. The human mind enters into that false belief condition. It doesn't really enter into the false picture condition. So if I contrast these two, or if Jung-hee does, we should expect to see something about this mentalizing system, and we do. We see it in the key regions, we see it in the controls, we see it a little bit in the patients as well, but you can see they're substantially less active than what we have in our controls. So here again, kind of like with social cue recognition or face identification, face emotion identification, we have a situation in which we have performance differences and we also have activation differences between patients and controls. The last of these boxes I'll talk about is emotion regulation. Emotion regulation are processes by which people influence which emotion is experienced, when it's experienced, and how it's experienced. And the most extensively studied one is called cognitive reappraisal, which is when you change your interpretations or appraisals of stimuli to alter an emotional response. So I know that that's not intuitive, but I can try to make it intuitive. The example I like to use is, I'm not crazy about flying anymore, and I don't think most people are. And so I use that as an example of how this sort of cognitive reappraisal might come in handy. I mean, the reasons why most of us don't like flying is there's these long lines to deal with, there's really crowded cabins, there's food that's not, and there's like noise and stuff like that. And so but we still fly. We're not, I mean, these are stressful things. We still fly. So how do we manage to keep our composure and not just scream at the frustrations that we encounter on these flights, because they're pretty routine? And the answer is we use emotion regulation, we use cognitive appraisal, because we say to ourselves something like, this is only temporary, soon I'll be at UCLA. And then we get through it without acting out. So this is sort of a common technique. So the regions associated with this include lateral regions here, the dorsolateral and ventrolateral regions, as well as the amygdala. And this is a reciprocal relationship. Essentially, the lateral regions are telling the amygdala to be quiet. And so there's an inverse relationship between the two. Now, how do you study it? This is another study from Bill Horan, in which this is an EEG study. You see pictures and you record EEG waves. You record from scalp electrodes. So this is an edible mushroom. It's a boring picture. It's a boring phrase. This is a poisonous snake that is very dangerous. That's a scary picture. That's a scary phrase. This snake that is completely harmless, it doesn't even have teeth. It's the same picture. Okay, it's the same picture, but do you think saying something like this is going to make a difference? The answer is it does. You might not think so, but we can measure the EEG activity from your brain, and your brain tells us that it made a difference. So, for example, this is the late positive potential. It's one of the things that Bill and other members of our lab study. The red line is consistently above the blue line. These are the same pictures. Okay, the red line is not regulated. The blue line is when you have those neutral phrases. The snake's harmless. This is just a movie scene. Nobody got hurt. Whatever. There's ways of sort of calming down the emotional response to negative pictures. So even though in the case of controls, the red line's above the blue line, in the case of patients, it's not. There's not much of a difference, and when the waves depart, they part in the wrong direction. So this is another example where we're seeing some between group differences. So back to our boxes, these are the 4 areas that I talked about today. And we can start characterizing the landscape in terms of what's impaired and what's intact. And this is important for any condition, particularly a serious condition like schizophrenia, to be able to identify which processes look like they're working well and which ones look like they're not. And this helps us understand sort of how we can develop intervention programs and how we can build upon those strengths. The last comment about this first part, about the studies, is that there's another part of the social brain that we haven't talked about because we don't understand how to study it very well, and that's social motivation. Now, this is the distinction between the abilities that I just talked about and wanting to. So you can have a situation in which somebody says, I have no trouble identifying emotion in faces. I have no trouble with mentalizing. I have no trouble with emotion regulation. I just don't want to be with people. I don't feel like it. It's not that I have a problem doing it or processing it or identifying the cues. I just don't want to do it. So this is a separation between the ability and the motivation. And there's 2 flavors of motivation. One is the motivation to approach other people. The other is the motivation to avoid other people. And I know all of you are thinking, why do you guys make life so complicated? It isn't just the same thing in reverse. And the answer is no, these are 2 different systems. So we have to be studied separately. In schizophrenia, the social anhedonia actually has been studied for quite some time. It's one of these negative symptoms, that this sort of lack of enjoyment of social things. It's a long-standing feature, focus of schizophrenia. It's a trait feature. It's part of the schizophrenia spectrum. So we're back to the spectrum concept. It exists in people who have risk for schizophrenia and also in individuals before they become schizophrenia in these prodromal states. So this is something that's received a lot of attention, but we have some scientific challenges to deal with. One is individuals with schizophrenia might not want to do things whether they're social or not. They might not want to read books or go to movies or do things that aren't particularly social. So how do we separate out things that are social from non-social? The other thing is that we want to study this in the brain. We want to study it in the scanner. And that's not a terribly easy thing to do. Sometimes to get the brain to reveal its secrets, you have to sneak up on it. And that's what Jung-Hee Lee from our lab did. She snuck up on the brain. This is what she did. She set up a paradigm in which there's slot machines. Okay, there's 3 different slot machines, and they come out in pairs, and you have to pick which slot machine you want. You're not told which slot machine is good or not good. You have to figure it out yourself. As it turns out, one is good, which means most of the time it gives you a payout, but not always. The other is bad, which meaning that most of the time it doesn't give you a payout or takes something away. And the other one is completely neutral. It does it 1/3 of the time it's good, 1/3 of the time it's bad, and 1/3 of the time it doesn't matter. So, but you're not told that. This is called probabilistic learning. It approximates how we learn in real life. And so this is a way of sort of getting people to learn things without actually telling them. And Jung-Hee was sneaky in a second way, which is that she manipulated the type of reward. So sometimes it was an image of money gained or money lost, and sometimes it was a smiling, inviting face, and sometimes it was an angry face. And so the subject would choose between 2. And so the better choice, of course, is to pick a good machine over a neutral one to gain something, or a neutral machine over a bad one to avoid losing something. But now you can look at the effect that type of reward had when those decisions are being made. The regions that are associated with this are the ventral striatum and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These are common areas for social motivation. And so here I'll show you some data. It's imaging data, but it's graphs so that you can see the magnitude of the response. There's the ventral striatum. And you can see that for non-social or social reward, the healthy controls don't make that much of a difference. Same thing for the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Those are the 2 regions we talked about. They show a little more, whatever you want to call, activity, responsivity, sensitivity to the social stimuli, but it's not a big difference. Look at our patients. And this is a significant interaction, our patients are not responding to the social rewards as much as they are to the non-social ones, and they differ from healthy controls in this regard. So this gives you some idea as to how you might start teasing apart not just the abilities, which is what we've been focused on for so long, but the sense of motivation to engage in one's social world, which is also important for social functioning. That ends the first part of the discussion. And so I'll move on to the second part, which is a bit shorter because it's new and I don't have as much data to show you. So what we'll do is this way you get to see something on which we have a fair amount of data and as well as things that give an indication as to what direction we're going in. So we're now in a situation where we want to take anything that we've learned in schizophrenia and apply it to the general public, to public health. So in order to do that, I have another quiz for you. Having friends is bad for your health. I mean, after all, who needs the aggravation? Has no effect on your health. Has a slight beneficial effect on your health because they nag you to eat well, exercise, that sort of thing. Means that you have a 50% higher chance of being alive in 7 years if you're in mid-60s. Correct. This is the size of the effect of being socially connected. So the construct of interest is social disconnection, which is objective, long-standing lack of contact with friends, contact with community groups, contact with family, but it's objective. We'll talk about subjective in a minute. It's really prevalent in individuals with severe mental illness. Obviously, schizophrenia is not the only one, but schizophrenia is the disease we focus on. And as I've mentioned, social dysfunction is a huge issue for the disorder, and it leads to international levels of disability. But it's also commonly observed in the general community, and it's a public health problem. So first of all, what do we mean by the general community? We're not fancy here. We just mean that we didn't use clinics, we didn't use referrals, we just get people sort of unselected through no particular referral network. How much social disconnection is there in the general community? No one's really sure, but it's about 5 to 10%. It's not trivial. It's not trivial. That's the number of people that say they don't have confidants. Is it increasing in the US? Probably is. I mean, there's a feeling that it's increasing, but the data does support that the social network size is decreasing over the last few decades. Is this a problem because of social networking or online connections? And does it help or hurt? And the answer, it can do both. This doesn't seem to be a strong directional thing. In other words, the social networking can help people who want to be connected, can hurt people who don't. This doesn't seem to be the reason for the trend. So it's not something we can blame on the rise of social networks. Now, social disconnection is very different from loneliness. Loneliness is the subjective evaluation of social interactions, right? So loneliness is how you feel about your connections. Social disconnection is an objective rating of how connected you are. The loneliness is associated with depression, and it's not strongly correlated with social disconnection. The correlation is about 0.25. So this is a really modest correlation. And if you think about it for a minute, it might not surprise you that people can be surrounded by people and still be lonely. And it might not surprise you that many of our individuals with schizophrenia are not around other people and don't feel lonely. So the fact that this is a low correlation sort of makes sense when you think about different individuals. Now, what do we know about the social disconnection and early mortality? I mean, let's be realistic here. What about smoking? What about obesity? What about poverty? I mean, I have enough, public health things to worry about. Do I really have to worry about social disconnection? And these data indicate you do. Anything to the right of the vertical line is bad for you. And the further right, the worse it is. And social disconnection, the two lines are because we have one line for men and one line for women. And social disconnection is at the same level of risk for early mortality as poor health at baseline, smoking, poverty, and it's higher than obesity and hypertension. This is one large study, but this comes across in many studies. So if this is such a big deal, you could say, Michael, okay, I understand you're concerned about it, but if this is such a big deal, how come we don't hear like a warning from the Surgeon General or something like that? We got one. In response to a question about the biggest disease in America, Surgeon General Murthy, that's the former Surgeon General, says it's not cancer. It's not heart disease. It's isolation. It's the pronounced isolation that so many people are experiencing that is the great pathology of our lives today. By isolation, he means both subjective and objective. So he's talking about both social disconnection as well as loneliness. So this is an area of concern. But then there's this question, like, if you want to study this, if you really want to study this, there's a ton of people doing this. I mean, there's people in public health, there's people in sociology, there's people in epidemiology, and they've done a wonderful job of showing the extent of the problem and the consequences of the problem for health and mortality. But if you want to know what's causing the social disconnection, if you want to know what's leading to it, if you want to know the brain-based, the within subject factors that lead to this, then you have to come to someone like us. This is what we've been doing in schizophrenia. So we can try to use the same approach in the general population. But then that raises another problem, which is how do you recruit a sample with social disconnection? They're disconnected. So how do you actually get them in? So after giving this a fair amount of thought, we realized we can place an ad on Craigslist. And we did. Do you have few friends, little contact with family members, and typically do activities alone? And we get a lot of phone calls. And you can say, yeah, Michael, but let's be realistic. You're only getting a subset of this sort of universe of socially disconnected individuals, people who are online and people willing to come in for a research study. We know that. Okay, we know that we're getting a subset, but this is the approach we've used. We have other approaches that we'll use going forward. So now what do I do, since this is a new area, how do I present data to you that I'm not going to suddenly regret presenting publicly when something changes? The thing is that we have two independent samples at this point. We have a pilot study that we did to demonstrate that we could recruit these individuals. It was a feasibility study. And we also have one ongoing study that's quite large, but we're just beginning it. But that gives us essentially a replication sample. So, and we have over 50 self-identified individuals that are disconnected. So people that say that they're disconnected. So we have now enough experience with this. So for the next few minutes, what I'll do is I'll present to you anything that we've seen in both samples. We're just like any other research group. If we see something twice, we take it seriously. So here's my last, before I go on, let me give you an example because you might not have a sense for what these individuals are like. TL is a 49-year-old single female. At the time of the interview, she was living alone in an apartment, employed sporadically as a TV extra and intermittently collecting unemployment disability. She completed college with a degree in French language and culture. She reported she loves being an actress and feels like dressing up and playing all day is her way of participating in society. She spent her time exercising, watching cooking and travel shows, baking and running errands. When asked why she responded to the study ad, she stated, "I have few friends and I prefer to be alone." Further, she reported that she had never been in a close romantic relationship, but would like a significant other. On measures of social disconnection, she endorsed low levels of social approach motivation and moderate levels of loneliness. She endorsed some personality disorder traits, including preferring to do things alone because it makes her more efficient and expressing ambivalence about physical intimacy, but she did not meet criteria for personality disorder. If this sounds like someone who might be somewhat familiar, the answer is, given the base rates, you probably do know people who are disconnected. And we have a number of case studies that are all sort of different versions of people who are just okay not being with other people. So here's my last quiz for you. People with social disconnection from the general community have reduced social processing, right? Those abilities, social cue detection, mentalizing, and reduced social motivation. They have reduced social processing and normal social motivation. They have the reverse of that, normal social processing and reduced social motivation, or they have normal both, social processing and normal, and normal social motivation. And the answer is, I'm not telling you, because you have to pay attention for the next 3 minutes, and then you'll get your answer. So this is, again, the things that we found in 2 samples that I feel comfortable enough sharing with you, even though we don't have huge samples. Are the people we recruit really socially disconnected? Yes, they are. We have a number of ways of measuring it, and this gives you some sense. This is a combination of social disconnection scales that occurs in the context of a lengthy interview, and you can see that this sample, this disconnected sample, is much more shifted to the left. This is our comparison sample. They're not selected to be connected. They're just not selected for any particular social quality. So you can think of them as unselected, right? They're not selected to have a lot of friends. We just don't mention it in the ad. But this is a pretty big difference. Do they have autistic tendencies? Rare. Only 1 out of the greater than 50 was in the autism spectrum. We were surprised. We thought we would get more individuals in autistic spectrum. Were they lonely? Only about 1/3. So, some loneliness, but not the majority. Did they have impairments in social ability? We've given a bunch of tests. Social cue perception, including face emotion, mentalizing, empathic abilities, emotion regulation. They're completely normal. Across 2 studies, they're completely normal. They have no apparent deficits in these social processing abilities. Surprise number 2. Did they have impairment in social motivation? Yes, most definitely. Here you can see the approach motivation, and they're shifted significantly to the left. They're just less willing to approach. And this is across a number of items, that they're just not as willing to engage. In terms of avoidance, are they more willing to avoid? The answer is not really. It's about, it's not significantly different. It's not that impressive. But in terms of reduction in approach, it's definitely there. So now we have a pattern in which there is, in fact, a big difference in motivation, even though there's not a big difference in terms of the abilities. Did they use online social networking? Much less than our comparison group. So this is sort of across different ways of assessing it. They're just not that engaged, whether online or in person. Were they in the schizophrenia spectrum? Now we're back to the spectrum. The answer is many of them were. And this is really stunning. There's 2 lines of evidence to indicate that we have tendencies in the schizophrenia spectrum in our disconnected sample. One is that we have high rates of personality disorders that are considered to be in the spectrum disorders, schizotypal, paranoid. These are about 1 in 3 of the participants met diagnostic criteria for a personality disorder in the spectrum. In addition, you can give a personality scale, and there's 2 personality factors that are linked to the schizophrenia spectrum, and both are inflated in our disconnected sample. Now, one of them is detachment, and that's nice, but not terribly informative because they were selected to be disconnected. So in some ways, an elevation in detachment means that it kind of confirms our recruitment. But we also had an elevation in psychoticism. These are like low-level symptoms of unusual perceptual beliefs, unusual perceptions, illusions, unusual beliefs, unusual behaviors. We didn't select for that, but we got it anyway. So think how this played out, which is we left schizophrenia to go into the general community to see if we could understand social disconnection in the community. But now we're finding schizophrenia spectrum evidence in the general community. I mean, if this were a novel, this would be irony, but it's not a novel. So we just sort of say, gee, that's a big surprise. So this is sort of where we are now, which is we're taking these data as trying to understand the patterns. We're also in the process of collecting EEG and fMRI data. So we have quite a ways to go in this study. We'll have more evidence about the about the brain basics for these. But at this point, and this is my last slide, let me zoom out for a second because I want to talk about the process. We started out with a really big problem. We were interested in I mean, if you're going to spend years on something, it might as well be a big problem. We focused on schizophrenia because of the social disability, the social disconnection, and how that's a large part of social disability worldwide for both men and women. We learned from colleagues who study normal individuals or normal brains. That's not our skill set. We work with people like here in the Department of Psychology who understand normal brains so that we can find relevant networks. We take those insights and then use them to understand what happens in a disease. That's our focus. We want to understand what's going on in schizophrenia. As clinical researchers, that's our focus. But then we can loop back and take those insights and use them to understand another really big problem. In this case, it's a public health problem. In this case, it's social disconnection in the general population. I want to acknowledge the work represented here. This is our team also with the next generation represented. Bill Horan, Jung-Hee Lee, and Jonathan Nguyen contributed a lot of the studies. Amanda McCleary and Felice Reddy also contributed to this presentation. I want to acknowledge my real family, my professional family, and all of the friends and colleagues who came here today. Thank you very much.
Very nice presentation. I'm just curious if you might discuss how depression fits in with the social disconnection problem in the general public. Are they correlated with each other?
We don't have a great answer for you right now. Depression most definitely is part of loneliness, and loneliness, and the Cousins Center here is one of the outstanding places to study this. Loneliness has its own public health risk associated with it. So it's like being objectively disconnected or subjectively disconnected with loneliness. Both have poor health indicators. But we think depression's more aligned with the lonely component, whereas the schizophrenia spectrum, more with the disconnection, but we don't have a firm handle on that. And we know that several of our disconnected people have a history of depression, although they don't have it at the time. And it's not nearly as common as those spectrum personality disorders that we find. It's an excellent question that we're just beginning to get wrap our arms around.
Can schizophrenia be inherited?
I'd love to know who I'm talking to.
Right over here.
Oh, okay, there we go. Okay. So this, like many complex disorders, has a genetic risk factor associated with it, but it's not deterministic. It puts one at risk. And so there's a lot of work now on identifying those particular risk chains.
You showed, I think, the answer to your last quiz. You never gave us the answer. Not explicitly, but the answer was the abilities are intact, but the social motivation is missing in the social disconnection group. That differs from the schizophrenia group in that both of those are abnormal. What do we know so far about when? So that implies that you don't develop schizophrenia unless you also develop the social cognitive ability problems. What do we know so far about when those social cognitive abilities start going downhill?
So that was Keith Nectarline asking, as usual, a perceptive question. You would think that after 30 years of talking with him, we would have worked these things out. But the point is a very good one, and I didn't actually close the loop as well as I could have, which is that there is a contrast in which we're sort of down on abilities and motivation in the clinical condition, but we're only down on motivation in this community. And when do things start depends on the social processing domain. So, for example, Jung-Hee's study of this kind of focus on social versus non-social reward, that starts in infancy, or it should start in infancy. That sort of gut connection, that should start in infancy. Mentalizing, much later. And so it's interesting then that we do have this kind of intact process for this experience sharing, which should start early, but we don't seem to have intact at the brain level, not at the performance level, but at the brain level, with something else that should have started earlier. So the answer is it's not falling neatly. It's not falling neatly into sort of early versus late developing.
Thank you for your questions. On behalf of the Academic Senate, it is indeed my pleasure to express gratitude to all who made this lecture possible. Professor Green, thank you for providing such an extraordinary and stimulating lecture. Thank you to the Special Events Office and faculty who serve on the Faculty Research Lectureship Selection Committee. Without your work, this event would not be possible. It's been a pleasure being with you this afternoon. I now invite everyone to join us at the reception taking place in Schoenberg Terrace immediately after the lecture. Thank you and have a good evening. Yeah.
Video copies of this program are available for purchase from the UCLA Instructional Media Library. Call toll-free 1-877-958-2200